Hi, everybody. So I don't know whether this is on YouTube by itself or not at this point, because we're going to have a very intricate conversation about Tartaria and everything that's happened with humanity since. And Jeff is from the Pat and Jeff show. And I'm very excited. He's got really smart questions for me today, and we're just going to get into it. And this is information coming from my higher self. And I'd love for you to tell the audience just a little bit about yourself, Jeff.
Yeah, sure, honey. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here and be here with you. So I'm actually just a podcaster, your average guy, though. I got into this just by calling into a call-in show and asked all sorts of questions, and it piqued somebody's interest, in this case, Patrick Gunnels, and it was kind of fun. But what's really interesting is that channel and those folks do a lot of stuff like Q-related stuff and that kind of thing. But what was really cool is I was able to integrate some of the other ideas, the more spiritual stuff, and kind of tie it all together. And that's really what that Pat and Jeff show kind of does. It kind of ties it all in. And that's why it's so important to have a conversation with you. I'm actually a dentist by training. Not that that means anything. I was a chief medical officer in corporate America for a long time, that kind of thing. So, but my background is more or less your average person just trying to learn more and more about what is going on around us, trying to spiritually awaken myself along with others. And that's kind of what we're here for, to try to help each other along this pathway. Um,
Oh,
so I've got a bunch of questions for you, though,
okay.
today.
I'm excited.
I know, so am I, so am I. So let's just kind of get into it. So Tartaria, I mean, we've heard so much about it, some of us, most of us. Can you tell us just an overview of the Tartarian civilization? Just a quick overview, and I'll ask you more specific questions as we get into it.
So it was pretty much what we know as the world, worldwide. And it went beyond what we would call the ice wall as well, and beyond that second ring. So outside the dome, if you guys have heard of the dome, and they would be what I would call the people watching the Truman Show this whole time. So the ones beyond the dome have been the ones that have been watching, and the ones that were in the dome were the ones that basically got stuck here. And some of them were polarized to the negative, and some of them were fighting for the good. So it just depended on who you are, just like as a human being, it depends on who you are, whether you're fighting for good or evil. And we're not really fighting anymore, we're manifesting at this point. But they were beautiful. They had more knowledge that, was kind of hidden from us than we even can imagine in a lot of ways. But most of it was more 3D knowledge, so it was more mechanical. So, and a lot of them were giants as well.
So physically, I mean, are they a different being than a human? Or are they, where does that fit into the soul groups and that kind of thing?
They're a mixture. So the body of a Tartarian is mixed with the Anunnaki and the human. And honestly, we all are pretty much at this point. Anyone that is different shades of brown. So we're shaded from cream all the way into brown. Nobody's actually, black or white, in my opinion. There was a guy that said we're all different shades of wheat. And I totally agree with that. Like, but it all depends on what your genetics are, like how nobody's pure at this point. There were a lot of bloodlines that we know of that were trying to keep themselves very pure, but they didn't really achieve that either. But they had more Anunnaki blood.
Okay, sounds good and interesting. So when you look at these photos that we believe may have come from the Tartarian times,
Mhm.
the buildings are obviously beautiful. The society they lived in, they dressed so nicely with suits and ties and hats, and the ladies were in beautiful gowns and all these
Yeah.
dresses. I wouldn't say gowns, but dresses, and you know don't know if that would be equal to the Victorian times that we have in our history. Is it
Yeah,
relate to that? Do you think?
totally. And if you look at some of the Victorian items, they were so advanced in comparison to what we would make now. Like, look at the little, I think they're called animatronics, maybe, or, but they do amazing things and it's not replicated today. You can't replicate it, just like the buildings are not replicated. And a lot of them have like touches of the Roman history, the Egyptian history, because that's what that whole civilization sprang up from. But it's more intricate than a lot of those two civilizations were because they used their laser technology to create amazing things.
Including those beautiful buildings that we
Mhm.
see that are remnants, right? And can you explain why it seems like there are more of those kinds of structures in Europe and in certain cities, like Edinburgh, Scotland, and other cities like that, like Budapest, for instance, in Hungary. And yet you
Yeah.
look at some of our cities and maybe there's a Capitol building here and there, but it's not as much. And why is that?
We had a lot of what I would call false fires. And there were a lot of them were like in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And you can find them if you look up the Great Fire of Chicago or the Great Fire of San Francisco. Most of those fires were burning down stone buildings.
Interesting. And do we know who set those fires? How did that happen? Do we know what that was about?
Yeah, so there was a big agreement. So in what was it? 1797 is what I received. Now you have to remember too that there's a lot of different timelines and parallels and things like that. So the one that I know of was 1797, and that's when the negative won over the positive again. And basically, they took over and created a lot of negativity. They got rid of a lot of the population with what a lot of people call the mud flood. And the mud flood was a liquefaction event, and a lot of things sank. And they were creating a lot of things underground to repopulate. And I'm sure you probably have that question coming. But there was repopulation that happened, and it took a long time though. So there were very few that survived that event, that liquefaction event, but it didn't reach the top floor of a lot of these buildings. So a lot of people were already in the top floor. If you were in the penthouse of one of these ancient buildings, you lived through that event and you survived and you kept going. And that's where a lot of the beautiful, like, knowledge and stuff that was saved, I guess I would say, came from, is those people.
So there were people who survived this event, and you say it seems like somewhere around the end of the 1700s.
Mhm.
And um, were there survivors well, let me ask you this, were there tunnels underneath these structures before that event occurred?
Yeah. But those then were later used for nefarious reasons, a lot of those tunnels. So really, I should probably start with 1776. That was when the good guys won. And shortly after that, that really made the negative get pretty angry because they won in a pretty big way across, the whole, what we would call Earth. So within the dome, they won. And the negative didn't like that at all. So they began plotting. And in the 1797 or 97 type spot, they did what they wanted to do and they took back over. And that's what we're doing now is taking over again, but the frequency supports it now. So we'll never go back to the negativity.
And so they felt like as threatened as did they know this reset was happening? Did they know it was coming? Or did it just hit and take them by surprise? Because what I'm trying to understand is, did
Yeah.
some of them escape under these tunnels besides being high up top in buildings? They didn't get the chances. They didn't know it was coming.
No, they didn't get to escape in tunnels. I get it was only in the top of buildings. And then also a lot of the ETs kept a lot of native people alive. So they received information like from their higher selves, from intuition. They were out in the middle of the ocean, a lot of them. They retreated to the water. Some of them were picked up as well. So that more of them actually survived, and that's why they went after them later
Got it.
and
Okay.
attacked their children. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're say in a timeline that we might understand. Let's say it's the early 1800s, and maybe repopulation is beginning to happen. And at some point, did it? And I don't know who did this. Was this the nefarious dark side create the incubator babies? And was that
Yeah.
around the 1830s, 40s, 50s?
Yeah. What I received is by 1850, they had repopulated. And what they were doing was they were growing babies, basically empty vessels, and they would put a fraction of a soul within that being. And they learned how to fracture a human soul. And I got that they would fracture it up to 100 pieces. And those incubator babies were then, reintroduced to the world. And a lot of this had to do with a one of the first contracts that they made with the Greys. So that contract was what actually helped them accomplish that. So you could say this is from those 13 bloodlines. They made that contract and basically then created that chaos. I don't think they realized what they were getting themselves into because it
Right.
went way further than they expected.
Okay. So the 13 bloodlines, can you tell us a little bit about that?
So they're basically descendants of the Anunnaki. And they went through the Egyptian times, the Roman times, and they would make themselves the rulers as often as they could. They took over in Europe and kind of usurped the actual bloodlines that were kings and queens over there and took over. And a lot of people would call them Zionists, but actually, that is much, much older. So that is the Anunnaki group. And they're the ones who had the weird, like, big skull, that would go up. And basically, the Coneheads, that movie was partially disclosure.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And these are descendants of Anunnaki. Are they also Greys as well, or no?
I get no. The Greys came in, they wanted DNA from humanity, and they had already destroyed themselves pretty much. They couldn't procreate anymore, so they were on the hunt to reestablish their ability to have children.
Got it. So we have incubator babies coming on the scene, created by this, let's call it the dark side. Maybe that's the easiest way to explain it,
Yeah.
to repopulate Earth. Now, was the purpose of repopulating Earth from their perspective to create more humanity that they could control, but also have them manifest and create for them because they couldn't create themselves?
They wanted them to manifest and create. They wanted to harvest their energy. They didn't realize, like humanity has never really realized that they are a battery. Like even the human body is a battery. We create a tremendous amount of energy. The one human body could basically power New York City for an entire week. And yes, that person would be deceased by the time that, was over. But the amount of energy that a human body can generate is like amazing.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So, all right, so let's get back to our timeline a little bit. So we have the 1850s, we have a new civilization growing, and we do know that there's some historical perspectives, photos, and stories about these World's Fairs. And in
Yeah.
these World's Fairs, they had these exhibitions of these incubator babies and such. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, universal law is that you're supposed to ask before you do something to a whole group of people. So, basically, what they were doing is they were disclosing what they had already done. And then I think they were asking, can we continue to clone humanity? And that was the purpose of the incubator baby. Also, the Cabbage Patch Kid and the whole idea of the stork coming and just like bringing a baby, they're all disembodied. They didn't come from a person. So it's, a way to kind of get permission, which a lot of the movies and Hollywood and all of that has been about getting permission from humanity to continue to harvest their energy and kind of, use them like farm animals.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so the actual existence of these locations, let's say there was a St. Louis Fair, a Chicago Fair, a London World's Fair. Those were the Tartarian buildings that they sort of repurposed, so to speak, that were left over after that event in the late 1870s. Is that a correct statement, do you think?
Yeah. And then they would destroy them after they were done. And they said they were temporary, but they were all made of like stone, marble, and amazing places.
And okay, so then now let's say we're in the mid 1850s. And of course, this has got to lead me to one of the most prominent figures of the mid 1800s, which is Abraham Lincoln. So
Mhm.
we have Abraham Lincoln on the scene, and the story, his story that tells us that Lincoln was our 16th president and was the leader of this Civil War, this great war. Did that really happen?
No,
Yeah.
not the way that they say. Lincoln was a good guy and he did try to take back over. Feels like to me, he was also a giant, like he was a very large person. He was also dark, like he had darker skin, not a dark, shadowy person, but he had darker skin. And I don't think that slaves actually came from Africa. I think they were Tartarians that got enslaved. So he was freeing them. He was freeing his fellow Tartarians. And I think the way that they portray that whole event is like it's all twisted and lies, you know. Um he was really, really big, I feel like
Yeah,
probably.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of. Do you remember? I don't know if you recall, but there were always these stories about Lincoln being a vampire fighter and killer. I don't know if you've ever
Oh,
heard. Yeah, there were like movies that they did where he was a vampire killer, Abraham Lincoln. But and then, of course, there are other stories that say he wrestled and would fight physically when he was a younger man to earn money and just was part of the athletic stuff that he did. He was a very athletic, large, strong man. And I think that's a true story. That to me makes sense that he was very big and powerful and strong, not only as a leader, but physically. So,
yeah. Yeah, I think he was. Also, what pops in is, think about the vampire thing. who were the true vampires? They were the remnants of the Anunnaki. They were that bloodline that really wanted to steal blood from humanity.
So potentially that storyline, those movies, were really a form of disclosure in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about a story that we're hearing a lot about lately, which is the Ingersoll Lockwood story.
Mhm.
And if you search, and I went down this rabbit hole because this really intrigued me, the story about Barron and the last president and all these. It was a trilogy of a book that was written by this gentleman who, now, if you search his background, it says he's a lawyer. He was also counsel. He was actually as the story goes, Lincoln promoted him to be a consul, which means sort of like an ambassador, sent him over to Europe to find Nikola Tesla and bring Tesla to the States. Now, this is a story. Now, I'm really anxious to see what you think about this. Is this real? And again, the Ingersoll Lockwood we can get to, but this is a story not necessarily told by Ingersoll Lockwood, but it ties in the character into the overall story of whether or not that's linked to Tesla or not.
That is crazy because I didn't know that. I have those books, and I actually did a show with Richard not that long ago. And I got that Tesla was Ingersoll Lockwood. They are the same person. And he was basically went back in time to play a part for what's happening now because he was very involved with Trump and the Trump family. And basically, he's like, well, let's go back because he knew how to go back in time. And that technology's been around for a long time. So he went back, he wrote those books. Lincoln is in the bloodline of the Kennedys. So some of the Kennedys were more negative, some were more positive. Some got like corrupted, some did not. And the one that most of us all love, Robert Kennedy, and I'm feel John F. Kennedy. Those two were both really good. And they were really trying to break us free at that point. The thing is, the energy never was strong enough. The frequency wasn't strong enough until now for that stuff to happen. So, yeah, I mean, they're the same being. It's so interesting that he was said to go and get Tesla because, in my opinion, he was Tesla.
So maybe in a way that story almost is true because
Yeah,
maybe Ingersoll Lockwood, who was Tesla, went into the future to bring himself back, and I can see that tie in. That kind of fits. Definitely fits into the story.
that's crazy.
So let's talk a little bit about the real last name of Abraham Lincoln, which, if I understand it correctly, is Kalooni, Kallooni. And the story was that he had two sons. Well, he had four sons or four children. Two sons were actually hidden and sent to Libya to kind of escape this persecution that was done by let's say, the dark side. One was William Wallace Lincoln, and the other was Tad Lincoln. And then, of course, if you search a William Wallace Lincoln in some search engines, you'll find, and maybe on Yandex and some of the ones that will give you more, maybe a truthful story, that he actually was a freedom fighter for the Libyans and fought against some of the European, I think, bloodlines potentially. So does
Mhm.
that resonate at all? That kind of a story? Does that make any
Yeah,
sense? Okay.
yeah, it does. And a lot of in that bloodline was also, so this is a whole, like, it may upset some people, but if you think about Yeshua or Jesus, who was he? He was a prince, right? And a lot of people have figured that out. But he was also a Tartarian. And he, I mean, it was the time where there was a lot of Roman slash Tartarian activity going on. And he was basically part of the royalty. His bloodline survived. So where did that bloodline of Kennedy come from? Same bloodline.
Wow. And that doesn't surprise me. That does make sense. So we have this bloodline, which is the Kennedys, which is kind of almost from literally Lincoln to some of the Kennedys and some of the Kennedys, maybe not all. But then, of course, the next question would be the Trump bloodline, and how does that tie in? Because there are people who suggest, and maybe we can get back to the timeline somehow, but I kind of want to set a higher frame to
Sure.
understand it because we brought in the Kennedys, which is fabulous. Is if Elvis Presley, okay, was a part of this movement, this Q
Mhm.
movement, and all this kind of stuff, which I believe happened back in the days with Lincoln and Tartaria potentially, um, that Elvis and Trump are somehow related. And
I
is
get,
it,
yes.
you do? Okay, fabulous. Now, is it possible that their father was George S. Patton?
For Elvis, I get no, but almost like they were cousins or brothers or something. So they were related closely to each other, the two fathers
Okay. Two fathers of Elvis and
and Trump.
Trump. Okay, got it. Got it. Okay, very good. Very good. So we do have a tie-in then of Elvis, and it's interesting, the king of rock and roll, the king.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this question. Is Elvis still present in our timeline?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Pretty cool. Pretty
He
cool.
really doesn't want to be that known. Like it's just slightly leaking out. And think about how old he would actually be at this point. Like, I don't know, maybe like 100. He'd be really old at this point, as far as, but he doesn't appear to be that old.
Right. Okay, because this is important because this is really cool. Okay, so we have a relationship between the Clooney bloodline, which could be from Yahshua potentially.
Mhm.
Okay, we have John F. Kennedy and maybe even Joseph Kennedy. And I should ask this question. The history tells us that Joseph Kennedy, the brother of John F. Kennedy, the older brother, died in a World War II event. Did that happen?
No, I actually get he was sacrificed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
So their parents weren't totally great.
and
Feels
that's
like one of them was negative. Yeah.
okay. And that was Joseph Kennedy Sr., I think, was how they referred to him. And he was a tycoon, I think. And in fact, I think he was an ambassador to Germany, as the story says, back at the times of the World War II, the beginnings of World War II. And actually, even um, was somehow supportive of Hitler in that he wanted to create a peace with Hitler. But the dark side wouldn't let them do that. Does that
Yeah.
resonate at all with you?
His wife was the one that was dark. So she was like the handler of Joseph, the husband. Hitler was not what we thought to begin with, but he was replaced and then became dark. But they had their own money. There was a lot of stuff going on there that was like against the World Bank. So they didn't start out as negative, but it became negative, and the storyline was very negative.
Okay.
So yeah, it feels like the wife is the one that did a lot of stuff. And it feels like when he was sacrificed, the oldest son, That almost broke the spirit of the father.
Okay. And that
Yeah.
does make sense to me because I think the father obviously promoted those sons. They were very close to him, very important to him. That definitely makes sense. So if we go back to, let's say, um, potentially Ingersoll Lockwood and Tesla. Now, Tesla is an interesting character. And we do know, we believe he's traveled through time. He's figured
Mhm.
out how to do time travel. Did he time travel? So how do I, in my mind, how would you suggest I frame he existed? Did he exist in the early 1900s and died in the 1940s, but because of time travel, went back even into the past and is even potentially with us today? Where is his where's his base? I'm trying to understand that because it does make sense to me he time traveled. It makes sense he might even have a divine connection. I don't know. And I was wondering what you
Yeah.
thought about that.
So, Tesla did have a divine connection. Tesla, the body of Tesla was born when we think pretty much like then it's written. He had a lot of the Tartarian technology. Like he knew about it in a lot of ways, even though he was young as it was like disintegrating, but he reinvented a lot of it and he also channeled a lot of it. Is he alive now? I get no. The body of Tesla has finally passed on. Not that long ago, really. Feels like he's like, okay, I'm done finally, he's gonna let go. But it feels like back in the 60s is when he actually time traveled back. And that's when he created the whole Ingersoll Lockwood thing with Lincoln. But the thing is these families, they've known about all of this stuff for so long. They know how the universe works and they know about portals and time travel and all the things that have been hidden from humanity. So, in the background, they've been working constantly to basically save humanity in all kinds of different ways. And not only are they physically doing that, their souls have been doing that for eons. And there's a lot of souls that are very big players that have come onto this planet to create change and to get humanity to say no to the corruption. And it finally worked because not only was the frequency ready, because God basically source is like, okay, we're done with this, all this polarity learning. I'm done. I don't want to see it anymore. But also, there's so many of us here. There's so many big souls that volunteered to come here at this time.
And that explains the frequency coming to that certain point where it's now time for this to really happen.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, so we have some technology that Tesla had that he either reinvented or re-engineered from the Tartarian
Mhm.
days. Um, did he pass them on to John G. Trump, who was reported as Trump's uncle?
Yeah,
Okay.
totally did. And I think that some of it had already been given, but that's the way they disclose it.
Okay. So then John Trump, who was he was not a contemporary necessarily of Tesla because he was a lot younger. Let's say in the
Mhm.
1930s, Tesla was probably 60 according to the timeline, and Trump was probably 40 around that time, maybe 30, 40, 30, something like that. But now then you see some interviews that have been archived of John Trump talking about some of technologies, early technologies. He did some early studies to try to fight cancer and some other
Mhm.
things. And then he also, I don't know if he himself discovered it, but an element called actinium. Does actinium sound interesting to you at all?
It does. I don't think the what it's for, I don't think we're ready for that. So my higher self's like, I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
What are we going to do?
Yeah.
It will involve a lot of ET type tech. So it
That
will expand things beyond what we're even able to comprehend at this point. But they've been really seeding a lot of information out. I don't know if you've seen it, but like Instagram, TikTok, like patches for your teeth to regrow themselves. We have a DNA, like we have a gene that could be reactivated that regrows your limbs. You know, all kinds of crazy stuff is coming out that we would assume would be crazy in the past. And now it's being seeded into the consciousness of humanity so that things can come out that actually do that stuff for us.
and that's fabulous to understand, and it makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting to note that actinium, I think its atomic number is 89, and the 89 adds up to 17. 17 is that letter
Oh, yeah.
Q. Yeah, so I think and I get it. I think there is something there that we're not supposed to truly understand yet, but I think
Mhm.
there is an important connection between the Tesla John Trump technology and this element and what it's going to be capable of doing to support humanity going forward. So I think that's a pretty cool story, and it makes a lot of sense to me. It resonates certainly with me. So then the next question would be, if we're now following along this timeline and we have Trump almost back up to today's world. He comes down the escalator in 2015. And now, was he chosen a long time ago to become this sort of persona?
Yeah. Yeah. He was one of a few that were chosen, it feels like. But he consistently, like when he would go on talk shows, he would talk about the world, how the US isn't being run properly. All of that stuff was basically showing us who he was going to become. Um, there were a couple more, it feels like. And JFK Jr. could have also done that. Like he was also on that track. So they had more than one, but he did have to exit. So he's still around, I think. And I get he's very integral in this whole operation that's going on. Will he show his face? Still goes back and forth. One thing that humanity is not supposed to be doing is giving away their power to others and basically worshiping another person and expecting them to fix their life for them. And Trump has been being portrayed doing wild, kind of what people are like, oh, I don't know if I like Trump anymore. Oh my God, what did he just do? And I'm like, he's, here creating a whole narrative. And yeah, they're not going to portray him as a perfect being because we're supposed to now become sovereign. And you're supposed to realize that you create your life. So I don't know. I think it's going rather perfectly right now, actually.
Sort of the way they expected it to.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Now, I do want to ask this question as far as the Tesla technology and time travel. Now that we're talking about Trump, is Trump a time traveler as well?
Yes.
Okay. How about
Yeah.
Barron Trump?
Yeah, absolutely. He's been a big one. And he's kind of, I mean, I feel like he's got more ET DNA than most, and his brilliance is massive. Yeah.
Is there any significance to his size? His very tall. I mean, does that relate to the Tartarian blood that might be in him?
Again, it's more Pleiadian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are the Palladians typically taller and bigger physically than we are?
Yeah, they're like 10 feet, 12 feet sometimes, but mostly like around 10, I feel like. It just
Okay.
depends too. Like the women are a little shorter, a little smaller. And it depends on which line. Like all the ETs usually have several different iterations of that ET, just like humanity has several different iterations, of a human.
Got it. I've got to ask this because we kind of went there, but we led off and we found another track. But I want to get back to this.
Okay.
So there's some type because everybody, I'm also looking at my age. I'm in my mid 60s. And I'm getting older now, and I'm facing physical challenges and things I hadn't had to face before. So the question of the technologies and through mainstream media and other things, more obvious storylines we're hearing about the 6,000 patents that were kept from us that the dark side, well, in this case, the corrupt people, whatever you want to call them, are kind of kept from us. And inside those 6,000 technologies could be medical techs, like what
Mhm.
you were just talking about, maybe a patch that grows new teeth, which is obviously interesting to me as a dentist, kind of interesting, but also technologies that might assist us in healing ourselves and those sort of things. Red light technology. There's all sorts of different technologies that have come out. Now, my question is, will there be med beds that might kind of bridge the gap until we learn new things? Or like where do med beds fit in? Is that just folklore or is it real? Do you think
It's
we'll see
real.
them? It's real.
It's real. And if you look at frequency medicine, med beds are frequency medicine. And there's different kinds of med beds. And some of them will just be like a room. Like you go to the medical area on Star Trek. It's a room. You lay in a bed and they use different instruments to do different things for you. So a lot of it, because we create our own reality, will depend on the person in the bed. So let's say they have the big C, right? And they hear, which this is another thing that just came out, they hear that frequency can now destroy that. And they agree to that. They also hear that they could anti age themselves in this bed, but they don't believe it because they haven't heard that before. And it's too big of a leap for their mind. So, what's going to happen for that person? They're going to get rid of the big C and they're going to feel better, but they're not going to anti age because their intention isn't there for that. So, the med beds will be a cooperation with the person. And there are different kinds, but it depends on your frequency, it depends on your belief system, what can be done. So there was a great Star Trek, since I started talking about this, where basically one of the young med techs people was taken over by a shadow. And these shadows were like, they were contained, and somebody stupidly, let one of them out. So one of them got out and it inhabited this guy. And when it did, it basically destroyed him. And he no longer had eyes. But they get him back to, the spaceship, and they put this like thing you would see that would like sunglasses kind of. And that was supposed to regenerate his eyes, but it didn't because the shadow didn't have the right frequency. So, really kind of thinking about that stuff. And his soul had been kicked out at that point, of that body. And that kind of stuff actually happened. It has happened here on Earth. We're not really having that happen so much anymore because we've won the spiritual war. But you know, it's a thing.
Okay, so we so what kind of I don't know if there's such a thing as a timeline, but is there that some of these technologies will be introduced and we'll kind of start dabbling in them, and then eventually the med bed will be exposed, or is the med bed coming sooner than we think?
I think it's sooner than we think. Now, will it be all the kinds? I don't know. I don't feel like that's necessarily true. At first, and also we have to remember that this is a really big year and a lot of holograms will disappear. So we don't actually have a population that we think we do. Okay, so a lot of non-player characters are going to go, and that's going to make room for interdimensionals, ETs, and elementals to begin to interact with us. So I don't think we'll see in like the regular medical system a med bed that will switch your age to like going back 30 years. I don't really see that right away. Now, if you're running like a really high frequency, you'll still be able to find one of those. I feel like you'll still be introduced to that, but it may not be in a like a medical emergency room because I get emergency rooms are all we're going to have left pretty much. So triage, then a med bed. And the med bed will correct, like maybe you broke your arm and it will heal the bone right away, right? Maybe somebody was paralyzed and they will be healed right away. But you have to stop the bleeding if there's an accident, and that will be like a triage type ER situation. But after that, you just go into a med bed and basically get whatever's wrong corrected. The things that a med bed will do that are more high frequency than that, I don't really feel like they'll be introduced immediately unless you are already high frequency. And then it will be more of an interaction with maybe interdimensionals, ETs. The people that are hanging out with higher frequencies, they will have access to higher frequencies.
Got it. And then are will the military run the medical system initially? Or yeah,
I get they already are in the background, and it's going to really disintegrate. A lot of those buildings will actually go away. Some of them might be used for housing for a little while, but a lot of beings are just going to go. Like a lot of non-player characters are going right now. We're in that process. And I received by the end of 2027, which I actually believe is more the spring of 2028, we won't really have NPCs here anymore.
and then what do you think our population will be then in this realm? Say within the dome area, and we know the dome's not there. Say within the ice walls that we have.
Yeah, I got around 330 million.
Okay,
So
interesting.
much smaller, but
Mhm.
we're kind of at that point already. We just don't know it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so, okay, so just to put an end on the medical piece of all this, so we need to make sure that as we grow our consciousness to understand what our capabilities are, and that eventually it might be different stages of med beds, but eventually, or tech, eventually we'll get to the point where we'll be able to just heal ourselves because our
Yeah.
frequency will be where it needs to be.
Yeah. And some of that is happening now. You know, I I honestly feel younger than I did a year ago.
Wow.
So we are shifting, and some of that is the supplements that I take. and some of that is just that I've released a lot of the trauma because your energetic field is where it all starts. So let's say somebody screamed at you and told you bad things about what they thought of you when you were a child. Maybe it was like a teacher or something. That would create a hole in the energetic field and then would eventually manifest if you didn't heal that, you know, that hole would manifest as some kind of a dis-ease.
And then, so if we're going to get to that point where we would understand, we clear out all the trauma, so that will make us healthier. We get more higher frequencies. We're getting access to different types of technologies. Then it'll get to the point where I suppose some of these folks that aren't going to make it, what happens to them? What do they just die off as time goes by? And is it, what kind of process is that for people who don't necessarily get their frequency where they need it to be?
I think a lot of people are choosing to go right now. A lot of people will pass with the excuse of the injection that happened in 2020 or began because of 2020. So that will be a big excuse for why people are leaving. People who continue to think that we're just physical beings and we don't really have consciousness will go. People that expect everything to continue in a 3D way will go. Like they can't get into flow. They look at everybody outside of them and blame them for their problems and don't realize that they're creating misery for themselves. They will go. So it's going to be, a lot of us, it's going to be people around us that maybe are like an old acquaintance. Maybe you'll have someone in your family that chooses to go, and maybe you have already. And there's a lot of different ways that they're going to go. So, just allow people, nobody is really like death doesn't really exist. So remembering that you can see them later, allowing them to release all the trauma in the way that they feel they can, allowing them to go and knowing that you'll see them later, that's important because we're eternal beings. So don't take on a whole bunch of trauma from people leaving. Allow yourself to grieve. Know that it's about you, that they're probably very happy, and let that happen and then kind of move forward. Because we're going into a time when we have to create the foundation for the new world that we're going to be living in. And the new world is like a new society. It's a more advanced, beautiful society on a healed earth.
And this is coming hopefully sooner than we think, right?
Yeah, it is. And, that's what's happening right now. Everything's falling apart in the 3D because we're not living in the 3D anymore, even if we think we are. So it can't match the frequency. And that's why people that are really hanging on to all the 3D ideas, like maybe they can't wait for the RV so they can buy a yacht and they can vacation like most of their life. And they're just focused on their physical pleasure versus focusing on how am I going to raise my consciousness? And raising your consciousness doesn't mean suffering. It means creating a beautiful world for yourself, but not taking from, other people in order to create that, which was the 3D way.
And does that also build in the humanitarian projects that we were talking about in the past? Like we want to build that in, and that's another way. Like I guess the way I see it is like I know what kind of world I want to see.
Yeah.
And when I look around me, I want to see a lot of nature. I want to see a lot of animals. I want to be able to connect with nature and animals. I want to be able to pick my dinner right from the plants that were growing right in our backyard. To me, that's the kind of life I want. And then I want to be able to help others if that's what they want, kind of figure out how to do it and then help them get there. Would
Yeah.
that be classified as a humanitarian project? And is that kind of what, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's absolutely what's happening. I mean, they're getting started in different ways, but they will basically become almost like a freight train pretty soon. So, humanitarian stuff is coming very soon. And by 2030, we're going to feel very locked in to our creation and basically on the track of continuing to build. So 2030 is when the golden age really begins. But we're going to be in this transitionary phase where people are building, maybe you're building the foundation for your project, but we needed to be in the fifth density and need to start to be aware of the fifth dimension, which is basically manifesting in flow before we created these projects, because otherwise they would have had to been recreated. We would have had to do them all over again. They wouldn't have had the right energy for this thing that we're doing as a collective.
And then I would assume, like in my world, that what I want to see, I don't really understand how to do that yet, but I'm thinking that as my frequency elevates and as Atlas, let's say, gives us more and more of those codes where our DNA gets more and more back to where it was, that's where the remembering comes and the knowledge comes in. So we'll know how to do those things. Because one of the things that kind of keeps me from like, well, I don't know how to do that. I want to do this, but how do I know how to do that? I know how to do other things, but I don't know how to do that. But I guess it eventually will come to us, come to me as I raise my frequency. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of us, it will come to us because it's our purpose. A lot of us will participate in a project that is teaching that, right? There's people that I know, they know how to do it. So they know how to do that with a garden. There are other people that are ready to create community. I don't think cities will be pavement and, all that like feeling separated from nature anymore. They're going to become communities within a city with lots and lots of green space in between, food forests. And when I saw like the Tartarian way, it was like, oh, I'm just going to pick a piece of fruit and that's my meal. And they weren't really dependent on food so much, but they still enjoyed it, you know, but they were mostly eating fruit. And
Right.
I think we'll get back to that and eventually we'll be like, oh, yeah, I had a peach yesterday and I'm not interested today and I'm doing a project, you know?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
perfect. 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 Well, that's kind of all the questions that I had for today, honey. I didn't know if you had anything else you just wanted to add and in closing, anything that you wanted to share.
No, I mean, really, we're just on an amazing track right now. And I would say all the ugliness that is coming up right now, that's part of the cleanse. That's when you clean out all the cupboards and you throw everything on the table and on the floor and you figure out what you're keeping and what you're not. We're in that stage right now. So don't get too caught up in the gross things that are going on because they're disclosure for people that are still in their awakening stage. And we will have people that don't totally wake up until 2030, probably, that don't completely realize how amazing they are until that point. But
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah. No, that sounds great. Well, this has been fabulous, honey. Thank you so much for spending
thank
some time with
you.
me today. This is great.
It was great. And those were amazing questions. So, and I just want to remind everybody that the Pat and Jeff show link is below and go check them out. I mean, if you guys are talking about Tartaria all the time, people are going to love that.
Yeah, no, we talk, oh, the things we get into sometimes. I mean, time travel and anything in between. It's been a lot of fun. So, but
Yeah.
thank you. And I wish you the best with your book. And I was
You.
really excited. Thank you for allowing me to be part of the launch party. It was so much fun. Those are great
Yes.
soul. You have a wonderful soul family around you. And I think the book is fabulous. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun reading through it and going back to it over and over again and learning more and more from it and looking forward to more books from you in the future,
Yes.
hopefully.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, I will write more. I'll probably do it in a way that I don't have to market it as much. I'll probably farm that out at this point, but it was really beautiful. And it was such an amazing party, really. Like all the beautiful people that were there in the chat and everybody that showed up, and how successful the book has already become. I mean, I'm really grateful for that. Yeah.
Well, it's great. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and thanks again for inviting me to be a part of that. That was
Thank you
great,
for
and
being there. It was
yeah, and hopefully we
amazing.
can hopefully we
Yeah.
can do something like this soon too. This is a lot of
Yes.
fun.
It is a lot of fun. I would love to do another one. Yeah.
Great, great.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.